Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about episode 5 of Station 11. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. We're rewinding the clock a little bit yet again, taking us all the way back to day 1. In particular, we're picking up with Clark's story where we kind of left it, technically speaking, in episode 1 when he was calling different people, Miranda in particular, and letting her know about Arthur's death, which I don't remember what I called him last episode. I don't think it was Arthur because I couldn't remember his name, but yeah, because he's basically going to like transport, well, I think his body, what was he doing? I think he was going to take the body to Mexico, was kind of like the whole point, and like take him there to be buried or something like that. I think he was on his way to Chicago first and then was going to go to Mexico, if I remember correctly. So I love that, like, when they're on board and everything, there's a lady with her baby like, oh, isn't that Elizabeth? It's like, oh yeah, and he's calling her Elizabeth! She probably didn't hear me. I was like, that's so embarrassing. That sucks so much. Because, like, we know that Arthur is an actor. Like, Clark is an actor, because I don't remember if I just said Arthur or not, but Clark is an actor, and like obviously him and Arthur were in a position where like, oh, like they both had promising career, but like Arthur, like career exploded where it seems like Clark's kind of fizzled out. But yeah, he ends up making an excuse just so he could go up there and see Elizabeth, and he's like, oh yeah, like Tyler, how's Tyler doing? And it's like, oh yeah, he's fine. Because we are missing a good chunk of story, like in between like the little bit we got with Arthur, like in, well, we got a chunk, but there's still like a good chunk of his life we didn't get to really experience, and that was we got some of that in episode 3 with Miranda's side of the story. But Elizabeth talks about it later on about like, oh yeah, he hurt me, and I'm assuming like because she's like, oh, it must be hard to keep it all straight, and Clark's like, what? He's like, oh, the names of all the women he's fucked. So it's like, right. So just like he cheated on his first wife, Miranda, with Elizabeth, he probably cheated on Elizabeth with other women as well. So, but I love that she kind of delegates like Clark to like, because we see Brian, I'm like, hey, I was like, interesting. And I'm like, the moment you see Brian, you're like, okay, I see the framework potential of like this being that museum place that he's representing. This must be like the foundation of it. Turns out that it is. But she was just like, oh yeah, like, don't worry about him, he's just a fan. It's like, right, because at one point, because to be fair, like, she wasn't ever really tight with him necessarily because of because he's been friends with Arthur for a very long time, and I guess like she was friends with Clark more so through association, but his main concern was like looking after Tyler. It's like, oh yeah, like I'm Uncle Clark, so like, you know, he's trying to make sure Tyler's okay, but Elizabeth's like, he's fine, he's dealing with it in his own way. It's just like, yeah, it's kind of hard, but it's still just like, there's just so much history, because it seems like Elizabeth, because at first you're not sure how long it's been, but based on the conversation, Elizabeth and him have been divorced for a long time, because it seems like later on that she talks about they're living in Germany. So there's a lot of complicated feelings in that moment. Like, he's dead and it sucks, but also it's just like there's just so much bad baggage there that she just doesn't feel as bad, and just like Tyler doesn't seem like he's really dealing with it. It seems like he's fine, or at least is that just her hoping that he's fine, or is that just her like projecting her own situation of like, I'm trying not to be affected by this, and Tyler doesn't seem like he is. So they end up at the airport, and obviously news is coming out about the flu and everything. And at one point, he was standing by a whole bunch of nuns, and he said, holy shit, I'm surprised the nuns didn't go, excuse me? And he just turns to them, and she's like, well, God has a planet. And he's like, I fucking hope so, and just walks away. I'm like, that's what caught them. But I was like, oh, I thought they would have had issue with the holy shit. You know, just like, you know, goddamn, you'd say that around a nun, she'll probably be like, watch your mouth, sir. Like, I feel like just saying holy shit, just, I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into it. I just thought that was interesting. But yeah, they're pretty much stuck at an airport. There's one particular plane that's left outside that's like, yeah, no one go near that. The passengers are actually stuck up there because each and every one of them's sick. Because even Shay brings up the conversation, like, you know, she's the nanny, brings up the fact is that, like, right, like, if you, would you actually die for a stranger? He's like, probably not. Because, like, for her, it's just like, yeah, we're all pretty much going to be dead. Everyone on board there is dead. They're just being kept away because we don't want to let them in here and get any of us sick. So they're kind of screwed. Especially because she'd even thrown it out there like, yeah, this thing is super fatal. I think it came up in episode 1. Ridiculously fatal to the point it's like, yeah, there's a 99% fatality rate with this thing. You're like, Jesus Christ, that sounds like some Black Plague level shit, you know? Because I don't think you ever really get... I mean, I haven't watched enough stuff with, like, a virus or something like that. Like, the last thing I watched related to that was 12 Monkeys. They never really went into the percentages of how, like, what the survival rate was for it, just knowing that most of humanity was wiped out with, like... you know, where our story technically starts in, like, what was it, 2043 or whatever, like, so that's about all we got, but we never really get the, like, oh, how, like, oh, you have a 70% chance of dying from this, like, no, you have a 99% chance of dying from this. It's like, that's hardcore. I mean, not unless I'm remembering the number wrong, but I remember it was, like, 90-something, and I want to say it was 99%. You have a 1 in 100th of a chance to survive this. That's bananas. And obviously, little by little, we see, like, the clock tick away, just, like, how long they've been there, adjusting. Like, obviously, you had, at one point, Clark tried to call Tim, because he had texted him, and you're just like, and he tried to call him at one point in time, but got his voicemail, and you're like, oh, no, that's probably not good. But it sounds like later on, he makes it seem like it was, like, a service issue, but by the time he does contact Tim, he got a whole bunch of Tim's messages, because he actually went to, like, the tower where they give all the stuff to the planes to be like, okay, you can land here and stuff like that. The control room, and I don't think that's the proper name for it, but regardless, he got all of Tim's messages. It's like, right, where they kind of left things off at, because I don't know if it was, but the way back in episode 1 when it's just like, it's like, oh, I can't take those 2 weeks off, and he pats Tim on the shoulder and just walks away. I think it's just supposed to be significant of like, right, that probably was one of, if not their last physical thing. It's like, why didn't you call? I don't know whether that's supposed to be like, oh, why didn't you call me in all this time? Or was it just like, rather than texting me, why didn't you call? Like, we could have talked that one last time before things went super sideways. At the same time, there's that whole, Agent Rokes is doing his thing, and he went to Clark at one point in time. He's like, I'm looking for people with skills. I'm like, okay. And he's like, and it's like, I was like, oh, what's this about? He's like, zombies. I was like, okay. I was like, this guy, and that, like, the way he was just kind of like, stay out of my beach territory or something. I was like, what? I was like, this guy sounds crazy. And then later on, he's talking to like the soccer team too, doing the same thing, and Clark's walking by like, what the fuck? Then we also see the toilet situation, which that's kind of jacked up. But while on the toilet, your boy Clark discovers something. He pulls up. Turns out Rokes isn't, because I was like, at first even I was like, why is one Homeland Security agent here? Like, if this was like a, like, yeah, this would draw the attention of like Homeland Security, sure, but why would one agent be here, not more? Well, it turns out because he's not a real agent. He's actually a custodian, and you're like, wow. And the fact is that Clark was just kind of like, oh, Jerry, and just took some of what is essentially his drugs. But then we find out Jerry left. Not only did Shay, the nanny, go with him, like most of the soccer team except for the goalie, which was like mad disrespectful. How'd that make her feel? Like she's literally the only person on the team that didn't get to go. He took other people with him too. And I love Clark tries to spin this because he had talked to Elizabeth, because Elizabeth, like a little prior to this, was all about like, oh, the private plane's going to go. It's like, but where are you going to go? Like, there's nothing. It's like, you and like, I could help you like find your way forward, like, you acting like you're better than them, like that you would rather freeze outside than be a part of their community. She's like, no, I would. Because she is because he even loved at one point, Tom, this lady is like, oh my God, like, I'm a fan of yours. Can I get a picture? She's like, sure. And he's like, why yeah, like, is this really the time to be taking pictures? I mean, we're all practically dead, and the lady that's with her baby just kind of look at him and is like, yeah. Because he talked about, like, oh, he was telling Miles, like, oh, I have all my optimism, stuff like that. Because Miles was like, yeah, I quit my job, like, a couple hours ago. Luckily, I have my gear here and everything. But it's like, oh. He's like, no, but I'm going to keep my optimism. And it's like, yeah, is that you or is that the liquor? And it's like, probably. both of them saying it at the same time, but Clark took it upon himself. Boy, oh boy, did he, not only him, Elizabeth DeMille, I was like, you opportunist motherfuckers. At least when Clark began, he was like, all right, I'm going to tell you guys the truth. I wouldn't worry too much about it. You're like, oh, Jerry's like, where he's going to go? Agent Roke isn't who he claimed to be. He's actually a custodian. His name is Jerry Mercer. And so, like, right. He actually kind of benefited us because he took a good chunk of those people away. You know what that means? That means 3 times the food for us. I mean, we have shelter, we have food, we kind of have everything we need here. No one's going to come to us because we're in such an isolated place. Like, no one's going to find us here. So it all works out. And it's just like, because at first I was like, it is interesting you sat on that information until now. But then Miles comes up, he's like, yeah, I knew Jerry, but I thought he was harmless. But also, he threatened my life. And then Elizabeth comes over. Yeah, he told me to leave my son behind. It's like, yeah, because notice he left with the entire soccer team, a soccer team full of women. And then he's like, yeah, like, me and Elizabeth and Miles were going to confront him. I was like, you lying, manipulative opportunistic piece of shit. I love it. Oh, I love it. It's like leaving the goalie behind, but the goalies, they're the main person. Like, they're the way you win the game or something like that. And the goalie's like, yeah. And I just love the chant. Fuck Jerry. Fuck it. Fuck him. Yeah, fuck Jerry. I never liked you. Yeah. And I'm like, holy crap. And now it's like, cool. So now Miles, Clark, and Elizabeth are going to be running things. And it's like, oh, we're also going to include Tyler in this as well. So it's like, yeah, all 4 of us are going to kind of be running things. So obviously they had their ideas of like, right, what we're going to do is, you know, Tyler was like, right, I could pull some stuff off of Wikipedia. He's like, right, pull some stuff off about electricity and stuff like that. And then like Clark was talking about like pulling off Shakespeare and stuff like that. I guess like it's interesting because I wonder is that supposed to be a little like smidge of a thread connecting to like the traveling symphony who are basically trying to entertain people. So maybe there was some level, I guess, well, it kind of plays into it later on where you have Clark is the one trying to keep human history because it's like, because Tyler created a way for everyone to kind of deal with stuff. It's like, right, use the headset in the control room to basically pretend like you're talking to someone that you can't anymore. Like, talk to the dead to, like, help them, like, process and stuff like that. And even Clark did it, but he did it just so that Tyler would do it. Because Tyler got everyone else to do it, but he wouldn't participate. It was just his way of trying to help everyone their way through it. And obviously hearing what Tyler had to say about his dad, like, you know, he's like, right, I wish I had come to your thing. It was pretty cool of you doing King Lear, but, you know, Mom had a night shoot and she tried. He's like, I'm glad I got to see you last month, but still, it's just like, I wish I could see you one more time. And she's like on the other side listening to the radio and just kind of breaking down because of it. But I think those were supposed to be early signs of like, yeah, things aren't quite right with that kid. And this should have been my key sign, because I even mentioned it last episode. I was like, the whole David thing is interesting. Like, did he act, like, doesn't seem like he got, it doesn't seem like he got Kirsten's copy, because not unless he put it back exactly to hide that. But I'm like, yeah, because like, not unless Miranda's still alive and she made other copies. But I was like, the only other copy was like, there was like supposed to be one for, I couldn't remember Arthur's son at the time, but I was like, or like I said, even Arthur's name, but I was like, yeah, his son was supposed to have one and stuff like that. And lo and behold, Elizabeth gives it to him. I'm like, in that moment, I was like, I didn't even have to wait to the end of the episode. I was like, you son of a bitch, you're David, of course. Of course. So you had your own copy, which I think is going to be the interest. I think that's supposed to also be like the thing of like David had that book and he latched onto it and where it took him versus Kirsten, and both of their circumstances of what they were around early days, I think influence with who, like what they experienced and what they had. Like, there's a lot, because even before all this, things were kind of rough for Tyler, because Elizabeth points out, like, there was bullying in Germany, and so she's talking to him about, like, right, your dad and everything. It's like, things were complicated, the move to Germany. It's like, right, your dad wrote letters to you, and I burned him. He was like, why? Even I was like, that's hardcore, and she's like, because I was selfish. I was like, oh, I guess it's like in a divorce situation, you didn't want, it's like, no, I don't want you to feel any sympathy towards him. I hate him so much that I want you to kind of lose touch with him. But it's like, she says a line of, Tyler's very good at finding out, can read when people are lying. And it's like, what did you lie about? His father still trying. You're like, oh, shit. So all of that was like her to be like, no, I lied to you. That I was lying. Your dad's actually been trying the entire time. It's like what the letters were supposed to represent, but that in itself is a lie. It's like, yeah, after the divorce, your dad didn't put forth the effort, you know? So like that book might be the only thing, like, you know, it's like, oh, like he never really, I guess maybe he was just so caught up in his own career, but it's also like, right, he was trying to feel some void in himself because of the whole Miranda thing. Because hell, even Clark went on a whole tirade at one point in time about like, Clark, he wasn't nothing. He surrounded himself with like C and D-list people like you just to make himself feel better. But despite everything, he's like, I love the bastard regardless. And Elizabeth is like, right, you have to try so hard to get people to listen to, like, all the energy you have to spend to get people to listen to one sentence from you. Where Arthur, it came easy. Like, everyone wanted to be around Arthur, just kind of like sticking that knife into Clark a little deeper. I mean, I think she had every right to be pissed because of the way everything went down. I mean, I thought that was wild. The moment that guy came out the plane, I was like, what? I was like, I would have expected. Like, it seemed like you're the only one coming out the plane. And the fact is that Tyler went over to him like, what's that about? And then brought him back into the party. Miles got the gun. Everyone's freaking out because I love the first word was like zombie. And I was like, oh. So I was like, this ain't no zombie thing. And it's like, because I was just like, nothing in this show has hinted that it's a zombie thing. I feel like if it was a zombie thing, once again, it would just be a weird thing just because like I'm making Last of Us comparisons, and once again, HBO is doing a Last of Us TV show adaptation, so I'm like, that would be weird, but it turns out, this guy might be immune, and Tyler brings him like, oh, he's immune, but no one would listen. Miles put him down, which is like, that's traumatic in its own right. You shot and killed the dude in front of, because at least Tyler never saw any of the death. Like, any of the death was like on the TV, sure, but also like everyone that was sick was on that plane, so it was like they didn't have to worry about that inside. But Elizabeth goes over to Tyler and it's like, oh, they're ready. Like, Miles still got the gun pointed at him. So Clark was like, all right, we'll make them quarantine, which once again, I'm curious how people feel about it, considering like this show hits a little close to home, even though like, it's like most post-apocalyptic thing of like, the event is the start off point, and to a certain extent, it's still an issue, but it's more so about, it's a human story at the end of the day of just like how people found their way through the pain, the trauma, and everything. And so it's like, right, we'll make you quarantine for a week, but everyone else was like, no, a month. It's like, all right, so they'll get on a plane for a month, and Tyler kept his head in that book for 3 weeks. Just like it seemed like Kirsten did the same thing around that same time, like she dived into that book. I mean, because she like had to like, she found out about her parents' death through a text message from like the hospital being like, the owner of this phone is dead, do not come here. So like I said, there is a direct, they are setting up like a very neat parallel between like, oh, like how both of their lives have, like they're at the same point, but they got their different ways, different experiences have led them to where they are. Interestingly enough, because I mean, that was like, because we hadn't even gotten to the first full year by the time all this stuff happened with Tyler, because when they were done with their, because they were in there for like a month. So, like, by the time they got out, it was day 32, and it's like, oh, yeah, by the way, everyone's going to feel a little more comfortable if you wear these masks, at least just for a little bit, and, like, and even Tyler was like, I told you, so, and then, like, we get to day 100, and you see Elizabeth's not wearing it, so it's like, okay, so eventually they got over it, but, yeah, like, the fact is that Tyler wasn't sleeping, and Clark is like, oh, the fact of the matter is, like, I don't hate Tyler. The fact of the matter is I've done everything for him and stuff like that. But Tyler was listening to their conversation. And so he'd go aboard the plane where everyone was dead, wearing his mask and everything, and read the book. And you're like, that kid submerged himself in death. Because even when he was on the plane with his mom for that month, he kept being like, there's no before, there's no before, there's no before. Because I think himself wanted to get rid of the before, because it was like, there was nothing good about it. It's like his dad wasn't really there. So when his dad died, it was like, it sucked, but it's also like, all right, I miss you and everything. But also it's like, you weren't really there for me. I'm kind of seen as a little bit of a nuisance. Like my mom kind of looks at me like I'm a weirdo. Clark, even though he's claiming that, oh, he's going to be my Uncle Clark and he's being there for me. I overheard him on the radio talking to my dad, with the headset and everything, being like, oh, Elizabeth and Tyler have to go. I've tried to do everything I can to protect him, but he's a destroyer. But you had your issues. He's stubborn and all this stuff like you, but you were never a destroyer. So I think it's just the fact is like, yeah, he stands up against authority. Like, once again, we're getting, like, hyper cuts of that because, like, we didn't really, like, moments here and there, but I'm like, did Tyler ever really do anything from what we saw in the episode that was really, like, so crazy? But I guess it's, like, that whole thing in day 12, him bringing that guy inside and stuff like that, it's just, like, you're just, like, very anti what we're building here. And even said, like, oh, I'm on the plane, I'm surrounded, I'm in the place of death. And he's like, right, I'm a save all of you. And I guess because he saw, like, right, I'm this issue to you. It's like, right, you won't have to worry about me. All of you will be better off without me. So he faked his own death and just left. Once again, under different circumstances. Like, that was like day 100 and stuff like that. Whereas Kirsten wasn't 100% on her own until like year 2-ish. Like, so it's just interesting to see how that panned out and how that played out. But yeah, they were both on their own at one point in time. Once again, she found the traveling symphony, and I think that kept her on the right side of things, whereas who knows what Tyler found, who Tyler found. But I think it now plays into, like, once again, why he's, like, so anti-pre-pans, because it's like, oh, they're liars. Because, like, yeah, like, every adult he knew around him was a liar, manipulator. He saw first and foremost, like, what his mom, Miles, and Clark did, which I'm assuming, like, they're still a part of, because, like, the only person from that museum place we run into is Brian. It'd be interesting if, Kirsten ended up going there, and, like, if Clark was still there, or even if Elizabeth was there, it's like, wait, it's you. It's like, oh, hey, that'd be kind of crazy. But also knowing that, she has her own ties to all of that, but also that David, has all of his ties to that as well. And he also tie in the fact is that this all kind of, they're even more connected because of the Miranda thing. So it's like, there's layers upon layers of, like, these deeper connections. But, like, him being, like, very, like, oh, you guys are special because you're not associated with the trauma, because he was surrounded by people who were so freaked out, so terrified about keeping what was theirs and scared of the outside world getting in. That's why that's why the museum has stayed hidden until now. It's like, what made you decide to open your doors now after all the time? Maybe, like, Clark and Elizabeth and Miles aren't around anymore. I'd assume they would be, or potentially, because it has only been 20 years, but you never know what could have happened in that time frame, or the structure of that facility might not. We saw, like I said, on day 100, we saw the early workings of it, but we don't know where the end result is after, here now, present day in 2040. But also, it's like, right, like, you guys are innocent, like, I don't know, like, because he's warped in his own way just because of a combination of what he experienced during those 100 days, what he lost before. Like, I think all that kind of jumbled and messed him up. Like, maybe the kid was already a little messed up and it just, like, life not going well, just like these dominoes of things in life happening to kind of push him over the edge. And then he dived into this material and it became his everything. It became his Bible. It's what he lived by, what he preaches. Once again, it's just like how he found himself to be this prophet and continues to be able to manipulate kids into wrapping minds around themselves to blow themselves up, to convince people to leave everything that they've known behind, because he did it himself. So he's trying to give these people freedom. It's like, right, you are free of the cycle of pain and trauma, and you don't have to surrender yourself to it. Which, once again, I was like, that's why I was wondering how old you was, because I was about to say, like, you are pre-pan, but once again, you're like Kirsten, like, because I'm sure they're probably going to aim it so that they're both exactly the same age, because I don't know if we ever clarified, like, how old Tyler was then. Like, he's probably around Kirsten's age. He looked like he might have been a little bit older, so, but I just thought it was interesting, like, oh, you're both pre-pans. So it's like him preaching, like, oh, post-pans are awesome. Like, you were born in the pan. You're special because you're not part of that cycle. But it's just like, it's just interesting to finally get, like, that backstory and understanding, like, who he is. And I'm assuming next episode will kind of potentially pick up with everything, with where things left off in episode 4. Because I guess that's like the alterating thing potentially we're going to be doing. Maybe that's also why they do like the 2 episode things, just because like one episode is going to be like bouncing back and forth like a lost thing between the past and the present, but it's mainly going to be about the present, whereas like another episode is just going to be about the past. Like maybe they're doing this because of the earlier parts of the season, but obviously they did like, well, since we already set this up, we're going to continue it, you know, with the next 2 episodes next week and then 2 more after that, and then like episode 10 by itself. I don't know. Because this is a one-off thing. This isn't like, because I'm assuming based on like, it is like labeled as a mini-series, which, you know, but I think it's like, yeah, this is just going to be a pure adaptation of the book, and I think the book is a one and done, so I'm very excited to see where the next episode ends up taking us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.